Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for being with us again this week's first session. Today, we're going to talk about room optimization, and we have a special guest from Odyssey, Jeff Clark. Welcome to the webinar, Jeff.
Hi.
We're going global again today. We have participants dialing in from Australia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, Middle East, the Gulf states, Europe, Russia and Ukraine, Greece, Western South Africa, and the Americas stretching all the way from Canada down to Bolivia and Brazil. Very exciting. Again, a big thank you to all the partners across the region for promoting our webinars and giving us an awesome audience. I'm Frederick, the product marketer for APAC, India and Middle East at Sound United. I am based in Hong Kong. Behind the scene today is Jim Crawley, Minnesota, Jennifer Mash in San Diego, representing the Americas. We have also William Chang from our office in Hong Kong. So we will be answering your questions online and live. So feel free to use the question tab. And our host today is Phil Jones, joining us from his lovely home in San Diego, California. Over to you.
Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you're located. It's Phil again. And I actually made Jennifer and Frederick turn on their cameras so you can actually see who the ghosts you're talking to. I'm not sure where Jim is. He's kind of hiding in the shadows, but he's here. And also William. So as Frederick mentioned, please put your questions into the questions tab. Oh, there's Jim. There is no bad question. A lot of times if you have a question, someone else has the same question, and I have this team of big brains answering questions as we go along, and they will also share those questions with Jeff and myself, so we can actually answer them, the big questions, as a group. I'd like to introduce Jeff Clark. Jeff Clark is a director of software engineering at Odyssey, and he has agreed to come and hang out with you guys for the next hour or so and answer your questions. So, Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and what does that fancy title mean and all that type of thing?
I'm director of software engineering, but I wear many hats. Predominantly, this has meant that I oversee software development for the PC and mobile applications that Odyssey produces, as well as technology libraries that other people build applications around. I also get deep and elbow deep into the signal processing. So there are elements of the signal processing that are things that I've developed personally and technologies that I've developed. So though I'm mostly a software engineer, I kind of do a little bit of everything.
Yes, and I appreciate you coming, because there were some questions earlier today that I was like, wow. And he's like, oh, this is the answer. And we're like, me and Jim are both like, oh, we didn't know that. So we've actually learned a lot, actually, just hanging out with you over the last few days. So for first, why don't we talk about who is Odyssey? And can you give a little bit of a background about the company and who this company is and how you got started?
You bet. We're kind of proud of the way we were started. It was a team of students, professors out of USC that started the company, and that started with room equalization research that was done by Sunil Baratkar. That was his PhD thesis, and he did that under the guidance of Chris Kyriakakis and Tomlinson Holman, who's in the theater department at USC. And people will recognize that name from Tomlinson Holman's experiment, which is THX, which is something he invented while at Lucasfilm. The collaboration with USC continued, and there are a few other of our technologies we'll talk about later that were research that was facilitated by having access to people at USC. So Odyssey's actually got started with Denon and Sound United, not Sound United at the time, but now Sound United, in the 5805, which was a behemoth of a receiver and packed the first XT implementation of MultEQ. So we kind of started with the flagship, and from there we launched into almost the entire line of Denon and Marantz ADRs. So it's been a long and productive collaboration between our companies, and so it's a pleasure to continue that.
Yeah, and like I said, we have a long history with Sound United and Odyssey, and there's a couple things that he points out that that's pretty interesting. Odyssey started off about cinema. It's been about cinema performance, and it started by Thomas and Holman was involved. The whole reason why THX came out was because theaters lacked a consistency when it came to sound quality. So THX was to certify a theater to know that you heard that movie, that THX movie, that George Lucas Star Wars at the with the sound quality that the director intended. They're passionate about their picture and they're passionate about the sound. Now that had to do with the type of speakers that were being used and how the music, how the content was distributed. However, your room has a huge impact on the sound. You can have the best speakers, the same speakers in multiple rooms, but they're gonna sound different, not because the speakers are different, but because the room characteristics are different. So in order to ensure consistency, not only do you have to have quality components, but you also have to take into account how your room impacts the sound of the space. So they understand that, and it shows that kind of history. Now, we're going to talk about all of the cool capabilities of Odyssey, but like I said, the room has a big effect on what's going on. And if you look at Jeff's room, he actually has acoustic treatments behind him. So Jeff, why do you have acoustic treatments behind him? Why couldn't I just do it with Odyssey? And fix.
Yeah, there are a lot of problems that we can fix, and we can certainly make, I think, any room better. There are some things that are just going to be, they're just still going to be there even if you EQ them out. Hello?
Yeah,
so in my particular room, I have parallel front and back walls. It's a small living room. It's shared purpose, and there was just not much I could do with the flutter echo that happened when the sound bounced back and forth between these two walls, and you could hear it just ring down.
Mm-hmm.
And these help diffuse that. They help reduce that, and our technology takes care of the rest. So you can see it's not fully treated. It's just sort of what I felt comfortable with.
Yeah, and like I said, so there's a combination between the first thing is try to make the room sound as good as you possibly can by putting the speakers in a good position, trying to eliminate, using curtains to get rid of early reflections, things like that. And then the Odyssey helps tie the rest of that in. If you can't do all that, like I said, I would love to have room treatments all through my house, and then through my room, but my wife is gonna kill me with no. That sometimes the spouse, the partner, the wife says no. So now you can Odyssey can help eliminate those things that you may not be able to fix because through traditional acoustic treatments like bass traps and diffusers and absorption. So they work together. Room treatments don't eliminate the need for Odyssey, and Odyssey can be made better. Your performance after an Odyssey calibration can be improved if you use acoustic treatments. So both of them kind of go hand in hand. So let's talk about some of the technologies that are in Odyssey. Okay. So the first thing, whenever you set up a home theater, you always have to go in and set your levels and your distances and everything else because you want to give the surround sound processor a baseline. How many speakers do you have? How big are the speakers? Make sure that all the speakers are played at the proper level so the mix plays back efficiently. Now, you could try to do this by ear, but the human ear is not sensitive enough for you to go through and level 11 speakers because each time the ear is like plus or minus 3 dB is what you could probably hear. So by the time you get from the left speaker and then you do the center and then you do the right, you could be off 6 dB by the time you go across the room. Just doing that, trying to do 11 speakers is going to be hard. So of course it does all the level checking and stuff like that. Now you'll see on our Odyssey that you'll see different levels of MultiEQ. And Jeff, can you talk about what those different levels do when we talk about different levels of MultiEQ?
Yeah, MultiEQ started out, like we said, with the first version actually that hit the market was XT, and that was a level of correction that gave a fair bit of low frequency correction and excellent high frequency correction, but we saw the opportunity for more and better. And so we came up with XT32, and that was a really clever way, if I can say that, if I don't do say so myself, of redirecting some of the power of those digital signal processors into the low frequencies. So we were able to do that very efficiently, so we could put better low frequency correction in, maintain the high frequency correction. Now, some systems are still constrained. Those DSPs get expensive, and you want to have an economical system that can still sound great. And so that's where some of the other specifications of Odyssey, the plain MultEQ, and there's even a version we did called 2EQ that was a very simplistic version of the same EQ in the flagships, but fewer positions or little less correction in low frequencies. So that's where those levels fall in.
Okay, so yeah, so our receivers, we have 3 different levels, and that's based on the processing power built into the receiver. And as you move up in the levels, you get more filters, more adjustability to fine tune the system. So you have more positions you can measure and more tools in your toolbox to actually make it to fine tune the room to get the most out of it. The next thing is there's a couple of other features on here. The first one is called dynamic volume, and that is used, I like to call that like nighttime mode. So Jeff, can you talk about what dynamic volume does?
Yeah, dynamic volume came out of USC research that we did, that we recruited a bunch of mixing engineers, student mixers, professors to listen to content and turn up and down the volume as they were listening to it. So we wanted to know, what do they do if they're listening at something that isn't a reference theater, isn't a mixing stage? How are they going to listen to this content? And so then we kind of modeled that. And so dynamic volume intelligently turns up and down the volume so that you don't have to, whether that be a movie with loud passages and quiet passages. It can bring up the quiet passages. It can bring down the loudest passages. So people like to say that that's sort of a dynamic range limiter, but that's not totally true, because we're really just changing the volume. The advantage is that you just don't hear it. Like it happens way quicker than you could do it, and it'll work on commercials. It'll work on sports, whatever you are listening to. It can keep it tame. If you want the full dynamic range of a movie, if you don't mind playing it as loud as reference, then it's not necessary. But at lower listening levels, especially, I like to set it to light for a lot of my sort of regular listening. Unless I'm getting really into a film and I want to fully experience it, I actually find it just more convenient to have it a little light.
Yeah, and like I said, I normally have it disabled because I don't care if my family gets upset about how loud it plays, the differences and shifts. But sometimes I even turn on. There's been times where I'm watching a show or a sporting event, and the commercials are going from super quiet to super loud and super quiet, and it just gets to the point where you just grab the remote, switch it on, because just that riding the volume up and down between the commercials and the show for 2.5 hours, when I can hit a button that takes me a minute to get to, just makes sense. Now, so there are applications. You can use it not to disturb others at night. You can use it because you just don't prefer these huge shifts in volume, or you can use it because it's just sometimes the huge shifts in volume are just annoying at times. So there's a benefit to it. And normally in Odyssey, when you do a calibration, that is defaulted to off, and you have the option of turning it on. The next one, dynamic EQ, is faulted to on after you get done with your calibration, and you should leave it on. So
Absolutely.
Jeff, explain why you should leave this on.
Our ears change how they hear depending on level. That's just a fundamental characteristic of our anatomy. If you turn the volume of something down, the bass kind of drops away, the treble drops away, and it loses its punch. It loses its tonal balance of what the original intent was. And if you're going to listen at reference, which is kind of excruciatingly loud in a home, it kind of just does nothing. So if you want that reference experience, you don't even have to turn it off. It's just not doing anything if you turn the volume all the way. We can talk about the volume control a little more, but if you turn all the volume all the way to 0.
Yes.
So the advantage then is as you turn that volume down, dynamic EQ will bring up the bass and treble a little bit, just in conjunction with how your ears change. It also does a little bit with surround. So we find that the surround impact goes away as you turn the volume down.
Now, what I would tell people is this is like you said, this slowly goes away when you get to reference level. A lot of times the way our receivers come out of the box, Denon Marantz receiver comes out of the box, the volume knob is from 0 to like 90. It's like numbers. But if you go into the receiver, you can change it so it starts off with like negative this, all the way up to like +5. 0 on a receiver is supposed to be reference level when you in a movie theater. So if you want to try it and see how loud it is, start playing a movie. Make sure and set the knob to that negative up and turn it to 0. 0 is 0 gain. That's reference level, and you'll see how loud that is. And for many people, that would be on my receiver if I have on that 0 to 90 scale that we use. That's about 75 or 80 on that thing. I never get past 60. So what happens when you use that it's too much for most people, so they tend to listen to it lower than what they would listen to it in a movie theater. And this gives you the impact of a movie theater and the immersiveness and the bass and all that stuff, even when you play it at a lower volume. And when you get the reference, it switches off automatically. So why would you not want to have this particular thing on? It's a really, really cool feature. So these features here, speaker setup, for all of your your distances, your time delays, all that stuff, the equalization, the dynamic volume and as well as dynamic EQ are features that are found on all of our Odyssey receivers. And of course, you get more filtering and adjustability in the MultIQ as you move your way up. Now, there also are some premium things on our receivers. So if you look at our receivers, we have all of our receivers, and a lot of other manufacturers have 2 sub outs. But most of the time, on most other receivers, those 2 sub outs are just Y connections that are inside of the receiver. The subwoofers are treated as one thing. When it comes to sub EQ HT, each sub is treated differently. So Jeff, can you talk about how we treat each sub individually with sub EQ?
Yeah. Sub EQ starts by detecting the distance and level of each of the subwoofers, just like the rest of the calibration process. Once we have those parameters, we can delay the closer sub so that it appears further away, the same distance as the other subwoofer. That way, when the sound comes from both of those subwoofers, it arrives at your listening position at the same time, and that gives us the coherence between those 2 subwoofers so that they work a little better together. The next thing we do is we adjust the level. So whichever one depends on how they line up, but it will adjust the level so that they play the same level. Now that you have that, they can work together in tandem instead of one of them taking all of the heavy lifting and the other one not really contributing much. So then we measure them together because the LFE track is typically mono, and there's not really a need to have 2 outputs other than once you've adjusted them with Odyssey, they work perfectly together. So then we EQ them as a unit, and that gives you really great sound performance.
Yeah.
We want them in locations. They work better that way. They drive the room differently.
Now Jim came up with a really good question last time. Hey Jim, remember the question about the multiple subs? You want to ask it again? Because I think that was a great question. Do you remember it?
Well, when we're not average users, and when we do big system setups, we sometimes use 4 subs. and we'll put them at both ends of the room typically, just trying to get better bass response throughout the room. And I've always wondered, should we be pairing the 2 subs on the left side and then the 2 subs on the right side, or the 2 subs in the front and the 2 subs in the back? And I'm pretty sure we have done it both ways over the years. So
Yeah.
Jeff seems like this would be the guy to tell me which way is the correct way to do it and quit screwing up.
Yeah.
There's, yeah, and then so the interesting thing there is you can treat certain subwoofers as basically being the same. So if you have let's say you have a symmetric room, the left half is the same, the right half is the same. The simple thing to do is put the subwoofers in the front corners and the back corners or something like that. Or maybe you have subwoofers on the side walls on either side. We tend to be drawn to symmetry. And the problem with that is, in this case, it works out well for you because if you have a left sub and a right sub, they pair perfectly together. They're the same distance from the listener, and they can be treated as the same subwoofer in the system. So you would connect that up to one output. And then if you have subwoofers on either side of you, again, the same distance from the user and kind of relatively the same position in the room, they should be treated as another subwoofer, because then when you take these two together, this pair will be aligned with the front pair by sub-EQ-HT.
Yeah, and that's a big point. And that's the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because I see it all the time and it makes me cringe when people have this beautiful, perfectly symmetrical thing where they have, the main speakers and then the 2 subs perfect within inches, exactly symmetrical, and then their center channel. The reason why you have 2 subs is to even out peaks and dips in your sound. And when you put them symmetrical like that, it acts like 1 sub. And the benefit of the elimination of peaks and dips goes away. If you put, I know it's not as pretty, but if you put 1 in the front and 1 over in the side, you'll actually get better sub performance. It won't look as pretty, but you'll get much more even bass response throughout your room. So for us, like he said, we could take advantage of that and use two subs symmetrically in the middle, in the front, and we EQ them as 1 sub because that's what they act like. And then we could put 2 other subs someplace else in the same kind of symmetrical position, and we can equalize those as sub 2. So a lot of times that's a quick tip to make your bass better. Don't place your subs symmetrical in your room. You'll get better performance if you don't do that. Okay. So that was something that Jim brought up, and I thought, wow, we should talk about that again when we talk about equalizing dual subs. The next thing that we actually have, speaking of bass, is the LFC, low frequency containment. Can you talk about what that is, Jeff?
Yeah, that is when you have too much of it, which for most of us, too much is never enough. But if you have people sleeping in the next room, or if you have nearby neighbors who don't want to experience the explosions in your movie along with you, and not really anything else, we can contain the bass by really just attenuating the lowest frequencies, but remapping them into higher frequencies that still give you the experience of having the bass without the low frequency rumble that transmits through the walls really easily. So that is a technology that allows you to enjoy your movie. It's not a reference at that point, but it's keeping you as close to the experience of reference without being unable to listen to it because your neighbors are going to complain.
Exactly. It's not perfect bass, but it's better than no bass, which is important. Go ahead, Jim.
And it's variable, right, Jeff? You can adjust it. It's not just on or off.
I've used it relatively little. That's one of the ones I have less experience with.
But it's a good one. I mean, if you're not worried about your neighbors, if you live in an apartment, or you just want to do it, and then people go, well, I like my super deep bass. Or if you think about it, most of the bass that you perceive as bass is not that deep. If you ever heard a car go by with the boom, 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 that's like 60 hertz. I know, because I used to be a car stereo guy, and we would go out of our way to tune the enclosures for 60, because that's the bass that travels, that makes the old people look at you like they're mad, because that travels forever. And that's the bass you normally hear. So that stuff, so a lot of that deep bass is not really that deep. 50 to 60, if it's done right, or 40 can be very impactful. So you don't have to, so there's some things about it. So it works pretty well to give you at least the impact of the movie without disturbing other people.
On the note of adjustability, a lot of these technologies, dynamic volume, dynamic EQ, they're all adjustable for different listening scenarios. So dynamic volume, we have sort of a reference, or we have a midnight mode, which is the maximum sort of reduction in dynamic range. And we have a lighter mode that's, and then one in the middle. Dynamic EQ is more tricky because it's really designed out of the box around theater and theater soundtracks, which have a reference level. CDs don't always have a reference level. They never have a reference level. So depending on what kind of mix you're listening to, if you're listening to something really modern, really compressed, really loud, you can change how dynamic EQ treats that. And if you're listening to something that's mixed, maybe it's more classical music, it's mixed at a much lower level, you can adjust the dynamic EQ settings to work with that.
Exactly. So hold on a second. I was looking here to see if I can bring up, I can't do it from here. I was going to do it from my my online menu system, but because I was playing with it yesterday, playing with the different dynamic EQ settings on my receiver last night. So like I said, there's multiple versions of Odyssey that we utilize, depending on the level of receiver you purchase, whether it's Denon or Marantz. And as you move up the line, you get a bigger brain, and with a bigger brain, you get more capabilities, more filters for the equalization, sub EQ, as well as low frequency containment. Now, a big tip is people go, well, how do I optimize my Odyssey, and I want more adjustability? And that's where the Odyssey app comes in. Jim is a big proponent of this app. That's one of the first things when I joined the company that he made me go out and get was this app on my tablets, on my phone, because this is how we EQ and set up Odyssey in our systems whenever we travel and we do demonstrations. And that is because there's a certain amount of brain power built into the receiver. It's pretty darn smart, but your phone is smarter, especially if the phone can dedicate most of its processing to running this app to do the calculations. So the premise is you plug in the microphone into the receiver takes the measurements, sends the data to the application, your mobile device, which is smarter than the computers used to send a man to the moon, does the calculations and sends the final settings and your final selections back to the receiver. And it makes a big difference. And it's available on the Android store as well as the Apple store. So the reason why I bring all this up is I hear people go, man, I like Odyssey, but it doesn't have enough flexibility compared to fill in the blank. And I'm like, have you used the app? Have you ran the 8 points of 8 positions? Most of the time people complain about Odyssey. They don't follow the most basic things, which is number one, and Jim will kill me every time if I don't do it, it's 8 positions. Jim always, after we spend all this time setting stuff up, and then he always says, everybody out, and it's Odyssey time. And he'll probably sit there with his cheap beer, and he'll run Odyssey calibrations to get the best sound in the room. He takes this dead serious, and Jim preach, man, about how this makes these demo rooms sound good that are just horrible spaces, but you get great sound out of them with this thing.
Well, it's absolutely true. And the places that we go to are not your average home, because we're doing meeting rooms and hotels and whatnot. Nothing that Odyssey was designed to do in our products, let's be honest. But you run into chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, different level ceilings, vaulted ceilings. The worst is having nothing but absorptive material up there with no reflection. You've got those tray ceilings, which really makes it hard because we're always using reflective ceilings because they don't let you cut holes in their ceilings and put speakers up there. So all of our immersion speakers are the reflective kind. And Odyssey has done a shockingly good job. And when you have that experience repeatedly in different rooms like that, I got to start taking pictures of all of these rooms so that I have this, montage of crappy places to listen to audio.
Yeah. We made it sound good in here.
Well, I do a demo. Typically, it's the Roger Waters, the wall, and it's the helicopter flies over the top, and you watch people's eyes or head raise up as the thing goes over. And when I get done, I'll say, "Did you hear the helicopter?" Yes. All right, look above your head. Odyssey fixed that, and you heard it. What is it going to do in the average consumer's home?
To remember, the whole goal of Odyssey is to give your surrounds processor a baseline, a good baseline, a zero to start from. So if you think about surround sound speakers, right, they give you all of these different recommended positions and angles and everything else. Now, those are the recommended positions. They go, oh, we want your speaker to be this far from you, and it should have this approach angle, and need to be this close to the couch. But you know what? Not everybody gets to put their couch in like DTS has dead center. So if I push the speakers back, if I push the couch back, Odyssey tells the system that the couch is pushed back. So it delays the rears a little bit longer, so it comes out as if the couch was in the middle of the room. So it gives it the proper timing, it gives it the proper level. It helps deal with if your speakers don't have if they're in the ceiling and you're a little bit further back and the off-axis response is not very good, it can correct for that. So it helps give the system, the surround sound processor, a zero baseline that all of the processing is added on top of. And so when you combine good surround processing with a good baseline, you get better performance. Now there's one. Go ahead.
We like to think we built the foundation, and the other technologies can build on that from there.
Exactly. The old thing was, we always joke, it's almost like in order to make good beer, you got to have good water. so the first thing is, let's purify the water. So now it's who's the best brewmaster, instead of like dealing with like dirty, overly salty, let's purify the water and give you a baseline, and now we can see which brewmaster is better, the IMAX brewmaster or the Atmos brewmaster.
Or you can add your preference on top of it. So if you want one thing and I want another, we can go from there.
Exactly.
By the way, Jeff, I just want to defend myself a little bit from Mr. Jones over there. The reason that I have to kick everybody out of the room is people don't know how to be quiet.
We talk.
Turn your phone off. Turn your phone off. Jeez. Yeah. So it's just get out.
Yeah. I mean, our measurement process is very robust to background noise, as robust as possible. But no, it'll tell you if you've got too much background noise, or it'll tell you if people are talking. It'll try and go louder. So if they keep talking, it'll go louder. If they keep talking some more, it'll go louder. But we have a limit.
If you guys like these, tell your friends to actually subscribe. I always say that to the YouTube channel. As always, I'd like to thank my team behind the cameras, that are Frederick, William, Jim, Jennifer. Thank you again for spending time with me and our little Sound United family, and Jeff for coming and answering all of these detailed questions. So take care, and we will talk to you soon.